And that's why it's so powerful when you're doing like a somatic healing session and I don't, you can answer this, but I know what I've seen when I encourage people or, guide them through how to get back into their body and sit in that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Equanimity is a beautiful thing, and not many people can, I love that word, equanimity, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
sit and be in whatever it is that you're in right now. Can you do that? And a lot of people are like, ew, I can't, I want to be here, right? No, you don't want to be here because it's uncomfortable.
Yep.
And embracing that discomfort is another thing that I really work on, because unless you do physically embrace it, emotionally embrace it, you can't let go of it and you can't
Yeah.
complete that circle like you
Right.
talked about.
And it will eventually manifest into something big.
Alrighty, it is time to stop hitting snooze and awaken to a life worth being, the fun and inspiring podcast that dives deep into what makes life truly fulfilling. I'm your host, Sue Willoughby, a self-proclaimed badass transformational life coach for women over 40. Join me as I explore the extraordinary journeys of ordinary people who've transformed their lives from the inside out. Tune in weekly to uncover the secrets to smashing through your perceived limits and creating a life that's not just well lived, but totally worth being. I am really excited today. I have an amazing guest and I can't wait to talk to her. Her name is Laurie James, and Laurie is a mother, a divorcee, a recovering caregiver turned author, somatic relationship coach, and a podcaster. Laurie's podcast, Confessions of a Freebird, was inspired by her youngest of 4 children leaving the nest, and it is the sequel to her book, Sandwiched, a memoir of holding on and letting go. Laurie's book is about her journey from loneliness to finding belonging during a time when she was raising 4 teenage daughters. Her mother had a heart attack and needed care, and this was all going on while her marriage was beginning to crumble. Laurie now coaches women in midlife, blending her somatic training into her coaching to help women divorce, heal, and date differently so that they can find more happiness and joy in their relationships. Laurie, wow. That's all I got to say, girl. Wow, that's a lot. I'm amazed that you're here. So,
There were times when I wasn't sure I'd ever be here.
well, I'm happy that you're here, and I'm sure a lot of other people are as well. That's a lot
Yeah.
to go through, and I'm excited to hear about your book and how it all came about.
It's a memoir of holding on and letting go.
There you go. There you go. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think my interpretation of that title might be a little bit different than your interpretation of the title or your meaning behind the title.
Yeah, well, definitely, and I think that there's multiple meanings. When we have children and families and friends, and we get to midlife, we are multi-layered, and there's
Mhm.
layers, right, within our lives that affect who we are and our outcomes. But how I came up with the name of the book is, as I was writing it, as I was telling you before we jumped on, I started writing it as the Caregiver Chronicles, kind of like the Nanny Diaries.
Oh, gotcha.
It was a
Right.
movie back in the day,
Mhm.
because I was having all these trouble with my caregivers when I was first caring for my parents. My mother, who had this heart attack, and that put her deeper into dementia. We saw very early signs of it. And my
Mm.
dad was just not capable of taking care of her. And he even struggled to take care of himself, even though he didn't have any ailments per se
Mm,
at the
gotcha.
time. But how I came up with the title is, as I was writing it, so I'm like, this is more than just the Caregiver Chronicles. This is about the sandwich generation, which is a term I stumbled upon while I was writing my book, which is defined as people who are between the ages of 45 and 65 who have kids at home, or they are still financially supporting kids and they're caring for their elderly parents in some fashion,
Ah,
either
gotcha.
daily or just overseeing their care. And that's happening because we are having children later. Our parents, it's really the first generation that our parents are living longer. Because if you think about our grandparents, I mean, I don't know about yours, but mine, one had a heart attack and died, within a week. The other one had a stroke
Mm,
and died right
mhm.
away. So modern medicine is keeping people alive longer, which is good, but it's also very taxing. I won't
Mhm.
get into the whole healthcare system because that's a whole nother podcast in itself.
Totally, totally, yeah.
So that's how I came up with the book. But really, what my book is about, and it is very layered. I'm adopted, so it's about adoption. It's about parenting. It's about marriage. It's about family. But really, what my book is about is I felt very alone for most of my life.
Mm,
And it's my very introspective journey to finding belonging. And who in the end, at the end of the day, do we belong to?
yeah,
Ourselves, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And so there was a lot of things that were going on during that time that I was not being true to myself. I don't want to say I was betraying myself because that sounds so nice, but I wasn't truly, I wasn't being true to myself. And it was because of fear,
Ah, I
right?
see.
I created what I thought was this ideal family. And I
Mhm.
thought it was going to save me because of my very dysfunctional childhood. And my parents loved me and they did the best that they could at the time, but we don't come out unscathed typically.
I was just
There's
gonna ask
Go
you,
ahead.
is there such a thing as a functional
Yeah.
upbringing or a
No.
functional childhood? I I don't
I
think so.
think there is a term out there that I've heard, and I am not going to quote the person because I don't remember who it said it, but it basically says you don't have to be the perfect parent. You just have to be the good enough parent, right?
Keep them alive.
And but some of us, it's like our parents, and I know a little bit about your story too.
Mhm.
Our
Yeah,
parents did the best they could with what
absolutely.
they handled. It doesn't make what some of the things that they did okay. And it doesn't mean that they didn't leave scars on us either. But, just being adopted itself is a traumatic experience. And I didn't really understand that and really dig into that and deal with that until I was in my 40s and
Wow.
50s.
Yeah. Wow, okay, so that's a lot
Yeah.
still. I I haven't changed my tune on that. Um, and when you said, belonging to yourself or taking care of yourself or
Mhm.
considering self, I think it's really difficult to even consider self
Mhm.
when you have 4 teenage girls, you've got
Mhm.
kids, you've got a husband and a marriage that is falling apart, and you've
Mhm.
got 2 ailing parents. That does not leave a lot of time,
Mm-mm.
energy, and ability to be self-aware and
Yeah,
really understand what you're really going through. So,
right.
and also in the middle of all of this is when you actually started writing your book, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oy.
So, but what okay, so I totally agree with you, and that's why it took me so long to actually leave my marriage. I was in
Mhm,
therapy for 5.5 years with my ex-husband before I gained the strength to leave.
mhm,
And the subtitle of my book is very fitting because it's a memoir of holding on and letting go. I held on to the marriage and then I let it go twice. I tried to leave the marriage twice and I couldn't. The first time was because didn't feel strong enough. I thought I
mhm.
was, and I wasn't. And then, of course, he professed he was going to do almost anything, hence the word almost. And he did for a little while, and then everything kind of went back to the way it was.
Yeah.
And then the second time I was faced with it, I actually told him that I wanted a separation, and 2 days. I told my older two daughters, and then I came home from a trip where I told my older two daughters, because my oldest was living in Chicago at the time, and I have a set of identical twins, which is my third pregnancy,
Wow.
and she was having anxiety and major panic attacks when I got home. She didn't know what, like, kids sense what's going on,
Oh,
but she was at the
absolutely.
time a
Yeah.
junior in college. She was very uncertain about, she felt like she needed to make the decision for the rest of her life. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
honey, you don't. You can always change colleges. Like, this is just a stepping stone. I know it's a big, huge decision. But so, and I had decided at that point that my children needed to come first, that I'm the adult in the situation, and that I need to put the health and well being of my kids first, because I needed to set them up for success. So when they did leave for college, they had the tools, the coping tools to leave and be successful in college. And then shortly after that, her twin sister ended up having some physical illnesses because her stress manifested in physical illnesses. The other twin, it was emotional.
Wow.
So I had to get them stable. And then
Yeah.
also my mom, because there was another point when I just didn't feel like I was strong enough to leave my marriage and lose my marriage and my mother in the same year. Those two people
Yeah.
for a lot of us are the pillars of our support as women, like your husband and your mom. It almost felt like two legs of a chair or a table had just been pulled out from under me. And the
Right. And
thought
you're
of losing
teetering
them
on the
both,
remaining leg.
yeah, way too wobbly there.
Woo! Right. The one-legged stool is not a good idea. Wow. Well, yeah, and I totally get that. You know, sometimes you have to put on your oxygen mask first, and sometimes you got to kind of put it on somebody else so that you can then feel good about putting it on yourself.
Yeah.
So I get that, and I do know also that you probably crashed and burned after all of this, the dust sort of
Yep.
settled, and you physically had
Yeah.
some illness that you were dealing with. And tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about that. How?
Yeah. So I was actually just finishing up my book. I had been out of my marriage for a year and a half.
Mhm.
Spoiler alert for the end of my book, but there's a lot of other fun, juicy stuff in there.
Oh, yeah.
And um, one of the things that I did, when I left my marriage, I was very afraid of not having enough to do.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And so I
Yeah,
probably
well,
said yes to too many things. I was writing my book. I had started coaching. I was saying yes to a lot of my girlfriends, and I began to date.
mhm.
That was all too much too soon.
Mm,
Never mind, I had been in therapy, but it was all talk therapy.
right.
And what I know now that I didn't know then was that to really heal some trauma, which I did have as a child, we need to get into the body and into the
Right.
nervous system, as you know, based off of the Equus coaching that you do. And that's where the healing happens. And so I fell very ill. I was in the hospital twice within a 2-week period. They could not figure out what was wrong with me. I
Mm,
became severely anemic. I lost 14 pounds. I couldn't keep food. I was passing out.
mm.
Um, I had these this what they finally diagnosed as migrating arthritis. I had like an air bubble on my chest and fluid
Wow.
on the outside of my lungs. I mean, it was really bad, and it was all stress related,
Yeah, it's interesting
right?
how our body will, if we're not listening to what's going on inside of us, our
Yep.
body is gonna be like, "Hey, hello, I'm
Yes.
in here," like you said,
Yeah.
yeah, trauma
And
and all
your
that stuff.
body will
Yeah.
eventually shut down, which is what my body did. So when you talk about, wow, all of that is so much,
Mhm.
all of that then leaving a marriage, which, divorcing is the second most stressful thing we can experience. Moving is right up in the top five. I
Mhm.
had done both because I was the one that moved out after my kids left, and then just the divorce of a 26-year marriage and four children, and creating this life together that you think is going to be for life.
Yeah.
But
Surprise.
when you feel betrayed and you're not respected and you're not appreciated for what you bring to the table, that all catches up, and
Right.
that stays stored in the body, and that's what happened. So once I got well enough, um, I have some therapist friends, and they said, "Okay, you need to go see Bob." I'm like, "Okay, who's Bob?"
Bob. Bob.
I'd heard about Bob, and I wasn't in therapy at the time, which is the biggest mistake. If anybody is going through a difficult transition, whether it's a loss of somebody, you know, it, a loss of a spouse, a loss of a long-term relationship, put yourself in some type of therapy, preferably a bottom up or body-based type therapy,
Mhm.
because that's where we store our emotions and that will help us express them. But so I eventually went to Bob, who is a somatic experiencing practitioner, in addition to a PhD, and he's a therapist, also a psychotherapist. And I have a very close friend who's a therapist, and she kept telling me, you need to put yourself in therapy. And what's interesting is 2 weeks before I went into the hospital, I told the same friend, everything is really good in my life, but I'm stressed.
Mhm.
And what happened is I didn't know how to back out of it, but my body
Mm.
did.
Your body just said, "Stop it. Just
Yeah,
stop it." And
yeah,
if you can't stop it yourself, I'm going to stop you.
yeah,
So, yeah, so I don't love that your body had to tell you when to stop,
yeah,
but I do love that you eventually kinda, with the help of some friends, find Bob, and as a somatic healer or with the somatic experience. Now, let's talk about some people may not understand what somatic healing is
yeah,
or what the process is. So I know that it led you to then explore becoming a somatic healer,
yeah.
and explain to us what that term somatic means and where,
Sure. Yeah.
tell us a little bit
So
more about a somatic healing session.
So I'll start with the basics.
Yeah.
First, somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means body.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different types of somatic healing therapies. Polyvagal theory is one of them. Um, Somatic healing therapies fall within the mind body therapies, and referring to what I referred to earlier, which is a bottom up approach, which
Yeah.
is, instead of just talk therapy or cognitive therapy, it is, where do you feel that in your body? Right.
Mhm.
So when, let's say, somebody startled you, let's just go with something really easy.
Yeah.
You got startled by somebody walking around the corner and it scared you.
Mhm.
Right. And what happens to your nervous system? You Your heart rate gets elevated. You might get a little sweaty. Your eyes, your pupils, or your eyes get big,
Yeah.
right? And what happens is, that is a threat, what we call a threat response that
Mhm.
happens in the body. And that is either a freeze response, you're startled, and then you freeze, right? But there's also a fight response. So let's say, something happens and you get angry and you attack
Mhm.
somebody, or there's a flight response of, I need to get away, there's danger, I need to get away.
Yes.
Right. And so what happens is, when we as humans have not been taught how to complete that threat response. So when that threat response stays stuck in our bodies, it can eventually cause dis-ease, right?
Mhm.
Dis-ease in our body, and we might get triggered very easily about things, or normal things might feel very overwhelming when maybe they aren't for other people. And eventually they can cause disease, which is what happened in my case.
Yeah.
Somatic experiencing is the developer is a guy named Peter Levine. He's been doing this for 40 years. It is becoming more and more accepted in the coaching
Absolutely.
therapy world. And it's naturalistic and neurobiological. And it's really the gold standard when it comes to somatic training. There are other programs and other people that have done offshoots of it. But, I decided to do his program. It's a 3-year program.
Mhm.
So, what does a somatic experiencing session look like? So, very simply put, sensation is the language of the nervous system. So, what we want to do is we want people to get in touch with the sensations and with their bodies. People are typically not connected to their bodies, as you know,
You're like a little
and
head
as you
floating around.
witness,
Yeah. All up in your brain
right? But that's our society. Our society has taught us we can think our way through this
and talk our way through it.
and talk our way through it, and
Mhm.
you can't. So, what I do in my sessions, and what has happened for me when I have been in my own personal sessions, it's really about developing the relationship with your body. So, if somebody isn't very connected with their body, what we start with is, okay, in yoga it might be considered grounding. Other terms are called centering. We call it stabilization. Can you
Mhm.
feel the chair underneath you right now? Right? Can you feel where your legs and the back of your body is touching the chair? Can you feel where your feet are touching the floor? Just saying that to you and paying attention to that,
Mhm.
I just was able to drop into my
Yeah.
body. That's been a practice for many years. I've been in somatic, my own therapy for 5 years on and off, and now in the training for 2 years. But my first introduction to that mind body piece is yoga, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a great
Yes.
way to get into our body. Equus coaching is a great
I was
way
just gonna
to get
say that,
into
yeah.
your body. There's no lying, right? There's lots of different, maybe like the gateway into your body. There's different ways.
Yeah.
Meditation can be a gateway into your body, right?
It
But it's
slows
all
down the system.
mhm.
It allows you to, like, you're just, like you said, up in your head, floating around. Same thing, like I said, when clients are in with a horse. Horses have that same fight, flight, or freeze response,
Yeah,
depending on how intense the reaction is. But they also go through it, and it's like, boom, I've experienced that.
right.
Okay, not a threat. Let it go.
Yeah,
We, like you said, we hang on to it, and it just sits and manifests inside of us. So when I have a client, I put them through that same thing. Like, where are you? Where are you? What are you feeling? What is your, you know,
mhm.
can, put make sure your feet are on the ground, because the horse is telling me that you're not. Right? You're not floating around the arena. Your body's connected to the earth. How? Tell me
Yeah,
about that. How does it feel? And I really
yeah,
get people to, and they don't realize it, right?
they
You
don't.
don't realize unless you take the time to stop
Yeah,
and like you said, breathe and make those connections.
right. Well, and that's the key is slowing down. And it's getting harder and harder in the society that we live in. And I'm not perfect. I get
Nobody is.
myself caught up in the day-to-day life and I'm like, "Oh, I want to get involved in this or do that," or I get an idea about an offering or something, and we all get caught up in it. But it's a practice, right?
Just like anything.
It's whether it's, mindfulness, but it's more than mindfulness. That's another gateway, I'll call it. But it's really learning to slow down And okay, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling this?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I express this in a healthy way to complete that threat response? Right.
Yeah.
So I don't take my anger out on Sue, who, pissed me off because she cut me off in her car, and now
Right.
all of a sudden I'm yelling at the
Or you're
person that
pulling
I
out
don't
your
even
gun
know,
and
and my day's ruined.
chasing her down the highway, right? Road rage.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
And
can
then the rest of
tell.
your day's ruined.
Well, yes, exactly. And if you are not, if you do not have that ability or you aren't even practicing that ability, then when you go out to make your coffee in the morning, if you accidentally knock it over and it spills, you just implode or
Yeah.
explode or whatever, and your whole day is ruined. And oh my God, life sucks. And it's like, you spilled some coffee.
Right.
Get the
Right.
towel, wipe it up, make a fresh cup, right? That's a
Yeah.
first world problem. You just spilled your coffee. You did not blow up a universe. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
crazy.
that's what happens when we don't, and our society has not been taught and really discourages us from feeling our emotions,
Hmm.
from expressing our emotions, from communicating our emotions. I don't know about you, but I was not talking about my feelings when I was a kid. And if I did, I was probably sent to my room, right?
Or
Stop
looked at
crying.
like you had a third eye, right?
Yeah. What are you
Yeah.
crying about? You've got a roof over your head and food on the table. Right?
Or I used to get, I'll give you something to cry about. I'm
Yep.
like, I'm already crying. I don't need
Right?
something to cry about.
I
I
don't
don't
need
need another
anything more.
excuse.
Right? But that comes from their trauma and their
Yeah.
generation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, and there's another term. If we can pass down, I know you don't have any children, right?
No.
No.
And there's a reason for
Yeah,
that.
right. But for those of us who have had children, if we can pass down 50%, only 50% of our dysfunction, I think we're doing well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just like, woo. Yeah, there's so much stuff. And like you said, with talk therapy, you're talking because you're either saying what you think the person wants to hear or you're saying what you think you want to hear
Yeah,
rather than what you're really feeling.
right.
And that's why it's so powerful when you're doing like a somatic healing session and I don't, you can answer this, but I know what I've seen when I encourage people or I instruct them or I, guide them through how to get back into their body and sit in that emotion.
Mhm.
Equanimity is a beautiful thing and not many people can, I love that word, equanimity, you know,
Mm, yeah,
sit and be in whatever it is that you're in right now. Can you do that? And a lot of people are like, ew, I can't, I want to be here, right? No, you don't want to be here because it's uncomfortable.
yeah,
And embracing that discomfort is another thing that I really work on because unless you do physically embrace it, emotionally embrace it, you can't let go of it and you can't
yeah,
complete that circle like you
right.
talked about.
And it will eventually manifest into something bigger.
Right.
But here's what I want to say also about that. So I love that you brought that up, Sue, because um, we are so afraid. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, and she's like, "Oh, we should have you." I'm part of a giving circle. We should have you come in and do a somatic session, or like kind of a group coaching session for
Mhm.
all of us. But the first thing she said, "But you're not going to make me re-experience, whatever that is." And it's like, okay, and here's the thing, it's
Yeah.
not about reliving
Right.
what has happened. The beautiful thing about Equus coaching, and tell me if I'm wrong, and somatic experiencing is you can do it you can heal the past in the present,
Mhm.
right? Because trauma and our part of our mammalian brain doesn't know past from present. So that's why we get triggered in the current moment with about something that may have happened in the past. So you can work on the trauma in the past with something that's happening now. And and I've done sessions with people, and I actually have if somebody wants to listen to it, I'll share the link in the show
Yeah,
notes.
that would be
A
great. Yeah.
session I did that I put on my podcast, and she didn't even tell me her story. We
Ah.
just sat with her emotions. So if something is bubbling up, don't push it away, sit with it, because even though it feels scary, what
Mhm.
happens is 9 times out of 10, in fact, probably 99.9% of the time, and tell me if you disagree, that emotion, that fear, that restriction, whatever you feel, which is typically, neck, chest, back
Mhm. Mhm.
is where we feel it, will dissipate if you stay with it. And doing that is completing that fight, flight, or freeze response, right?
Right.
That's how we complete that. And that's how we release it from our nervous system.
Yeah. And I do believe I actually listened to that episode, that you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah, I did, and it was like, "Whoa, that was really
Yeah.
powerful." But yes, I do, see people when they're working with the horses to, I can see it coming up, and so I'll start asking what's coming up for you, rather than saying, "Do you need a moment to get to, collect
Collect.
yourself?"
Yeah.
Right. And then in other words, "Do you need a moment to push that back down? Because we don't really wanna deal with that now, do we?" No, that's not why we're here. We're here to get
Right.
that out and allow you to move on and, all of
Yeah.
that stuff. So,
It's
yeah, it's
so interesting.
powerful work.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I just had dinner with a coaching friend who I went through my coaching training with. And she actually went to an Equus retreat
Mhm.
with a couple of other coaching friends of hers up in Oregon or
Okay.
Washington. She lives up in Washington. So I don't know if it was
Mhm.
Washington and Oregon, but she was up there, and she's German. I love her to death. She's a fabulous coach,
Mhm.
but she's been very corporate and doesn't show a lot of emotion.
Right.
And Equus coaching, she was telling me the story, and it broke her down. And she got super emotional about something that's going on with her in her life that she needed to process and deal with. And she's like, it was so powerful for me.
Yeah.
So, and I was just like so happy for her
Yeah.
because I know what she's going through. It's, some family stuff and her aging parents. And, I just knew it was going to be helpful for her. So, yeah,
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm so
another a
happy to hear
testament.
that. Yeah, I think that it really is, and it's interesting the people that are the most shut down in some ways and don't know what to expect. They're like, "Oh, how is this going to help me?" Right?
Yeah.
This is not going to. And then all of a sudden, there's like, these the emotions just start come bubbling up to the surface,
Yeah.
and just let them out. Just let them out. Let them be. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love hearing that though, about Equus coaching and
Yeah.
about the somatic work, everything. When people embrace healing, some people are like, "Oh, I don't want to do that woo woo crap." Well, okay. Well,
This
have a
is
nice life.
becoming
Have
mainstream,
a
though.
nice.
This isn't as woo woo as it used to be, though.
No, it's not. It's not. But some people are still a little resistant to it. And
Of
then when you
course.
talk about it, or you have a subtle conversation or a subtle invitation to do something, and they're like, "Oh, okay, I see what you're talking about now." It really does make an impression. It really does kind of, "Oh, okay, that's a woo woo. I
Yeah.
get it. All right, that's fine."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
here's the thing, it's like I said earlier, none of us get to this point in life
Mhm,
without having something, right? And when you think about the basic definition of trauma,
mhm,
at the simplest forms, it's anything that feels like too much too soon,
mhm,
too much too fast, too much for too long, or too little for too long, right? And so
mhm,
we've all experienced that at some point in our life. And and the other thing that I'll say around the somatic experiencing is Peter Levine says it so well, but it's not what happened to us
Mhm.
that causes the trauma. It's what we keep stored inside of us that
Mhm.
creates the trauma and then causes the dis-ease and eventually disease in
Yeah.
our bodies, and that could be anything from anxiety, panic attacks, hypertension,
Yeah.
depression. I mean, it doesn't mean that all depression is related to this, but some depression is. So
Yeah,
it's
trauma is a little like water. It's going to find eventually the path of least resistance, and it's going to come
yes,
out.
yes.
So,
Wow, I love that.
it's
That's
just
so
I mean, it
true.
might take a bit, but it's going to manifest and it's going to show up one way or another. So no
Yeah.
matter how much, think about my grandmother used to cook dinner in her pressure cooker, and it was this thing. It was a pot that sat on the stove with a metal top, and it had this little, which I was always fascinated by, right? You put all the stuff in there in the water, and then she'd turn it on and it would boil, and the lid was so tight that it would keep the pressure in. And
Yeah.
then she would touch it with the fork. The top had this little tiny valve on it, and it would be like psh, psh, and it would. I was just like, "Ooh, I want to do it! I want to do it!" Of course, there's hot steam coming out. That's not a
Yeah.
dangerous thing for a kid to do, but our bodies are no different. We keep that stuff in just as long as we can, and compensate for it on as many levels as we can until, like with what happened with you, your body was like just started shutting down. It's like, okay, if you're not paying attention, I will try
Mhm.
harder to get your attention to
Yeah.
deal with this.
Yeah,
So,
and there's lots of books out there that have, research backs
mhm.
this. I mean, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I mean, there's several. I mean, Peter Levine has written several books around this too. There's a ton of books that are out there for people if they're like, I'm not so sure about this, or, what do
right,
you really mean? There's more and more research being backing this now at the
absolutely.
beginning of the pioneers of somatic therapies, there wasn't the research, but there's more and more research that's backing this because there's so much that they are now relating back to trauma,
Mhm.
right? And emotions, emotions that we have shoved down and just not addressed.
Yep, absolutely. And then they manifest in other ways too. They, in when I work with my clients and they want to get out of their comfort zone and try something new and transition to, a new career or whatever it is, they're afraid.
Yeah,
And it's really the fear. And so you can, I can see it. Okay, it's in your body. That's
yeah,
that's where it lives, and you've got to deal with that before you can then, take that step in the direction in which you want to go. So it's all
yeah.
connected. That's the bottom line. It is all connected.
We are
We are
all
all connected.
connected.
No, I believe all of our energy is connected as well. And that's why
Absolutely.
we need to have a better understanding of ourselves, as you mentioned when we first started out, and build that awareness
Yeah,
of and give ourselves some grace and give ourselves,
absolutely.
it's not gonna you're not gonna change overnight, but be kind to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that self-compassion, and I
Yeah,
was not very good at that, especially when I was, in the midst of my 8-year period of time in my life when I was writing my book. I was like, "Why can't I handle more?" It's like
right.
and then I talk to people like you, and you're like, "Oh my god." And I'm like,
Yeah.
How
Whoa.
how did I manage that?" Okay, I did in
Well,
the
you don't
moment,
realize
but,
it. Yeah, because 'cause you're in the moment. You're on that treadmill, right? And then all of a sudden
yeah.
somebody pulls the plug and you go flying off and you splat against the wall and you're like, what happened
Yeah.
there?" Like the Wile E. Coyote in a cartoon, like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." You're shaking your head and you're like, stars going around. "Okay, got it. Paying attention now. I'm awake." Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Lori, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and, I
Thank
would may
you.
have to have you back to discuss some other stuff because I do
Yeah.
love the somatic connection. Um,
Yeah.
I'd like to know a couple things. First of all, I know you have a retreat coming up, so if you could tell me a little bit about that, and, uh, I think it's coming up in October or something?
It's actually
Um,
September, and that's
September,
full,
okay,
so I don't
okay.
have any, more
Never
room,
mind everybody, sorry.
unfortunately. So,
Maybe the next one.
yes.
Um, and if you ever want to collaborate on a retreat, I think that would be fun as well.
Yeah. It's so funny because after you were on my podcast, I was like, that could kind of be kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We
So,
could do
so
a little
yeah, we can
a
talk about
summit.
that offline.
Yes, let's definitely do that. But if people want to learn more about somatic healing, I know you're in the Northern California, Southern California.
Southern California. So I'm in
Yeah.
Southern California. I do work with clients one-on-one over Zoom, or
Okay.
if they're in Southern California, in person as well. I have a new course that I'm going to be offering at the beginning of September that is a group coaching around somatic experiencing and just, teaching people ways to regulate their nervous system. First, it's kind of the 101 of somatic
Right.
experiencing. I will also in the show notes. I'll send it to you. It is a free guide. It's my beginner's guide to somatic healing,
Oh, love it. Yeah.
so they can
Great.
just download that as a free guide. So that way they can just get the basics. And there's some little exercises that they can do also to start becoming a little bit more aware. Um,
Cool. I
and
love
and
that. That's great. Yeah.
and implementing, so much about this, as you know too, it's implementing it into our daily life.
Hmm.
And it's a practice, and it takes time to really incorporate some of these things into our daily lives. But uh, it really works. I've seen it work with my clients. I know that you have too.
Hmm.
And I am a complete, on the inside, I am a different person than I was 5 years ago.
Right. Inside out, for sure.
So,
For
yeah.
sure. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you
Thank
for sharing
you.
your story. I know that it was inspirational, and I know that so many people can benefit from somatic healing and the work that you
Yeah.
do. And just practice. Practice
Yeah.
makes progress. Not perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. So thank you
No.
so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for having me. I loved
I
our
look,
convo.
yeah, I look forward to chatting with you again. All
Yes.
right. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening, everybody. And Laurie James, I'll put all of her contact information in the show notes so that you can find out more about somatic healing, download some starter practices, and get on the road to self care and self realization. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Life Worth Being. I hope you found it fun and inspiring. And to avoid a bad case of FOMO, please be sure to click that subscribe button. If you love what you heard today, please share it with a friend and then hop on over to your favorite podcast platform and return the love with a wonderful review and 5-star rating. It would truly mean the world to me. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and on my website. Links below in the show notes. I appreciate you, and I will see you next week for more fresh insights on awakening a life worth being.